All right, so here's 13 things I wish I knew before I started Airbnb hosting. In this video, I'm going to break down why high occupancy can still mean you're broke, why most Airbnb locations are wrong from day one, why guests don't give a shit about you, why one night stays will destroy your business, why boring contractor focused setups outperform flashy Airbnbs every single day of the week, and how I rebuilt my portfolio for predictable income instead of Airbnb chaos. This isn't hype. This is exactly what has worked for me. And I have scaled stability and managed to get some more sleep. So it might be something that you want to listen up to. Okay. So, first and foremost, occupancy is a vanity metric. Too many people focus on occupancy rather than profitability. It's all well and good being 100% occupied, but if you've paid too much rent, then and your bills are too much, or you've underestimated your bills and it's not covering the nightly rate that you're charging, then ultimately it's a pointless exercise. And I see this so often. And for me, it comes down to the location, right? And I don't want city center tourist locations, right? They don't work on the mass, on high volume game. They are saturated. Everyone's playing that game. Occupancies are actually very low, typically across the UK, if you are in the hotspot areas. So how do we then beat that? Obviously, for me, it's location of where contractors are going to be working on a regular basis, where they're going to need housing on a mid to long term basis. And ultimately, that's where we can really cash in. So supply meets demand on that front. The traditional Airbnb host, you go on Airbnb, you search for studios, one beds, two beds in any city centre, Manchester, Newcastle, Liverpool, London, Birmingham, wherever. Okay, there are thousands. All right. Now, the typical Airbnb host will start there. That's how they get taught by the majority of these gurus out there who don't really know what they're talking about. They lead them down this garden path. And what happens is they end up fighting in a game where their occupancy is somewhere around 45 to 55%. They've overpaid rents for these apartments. They've spent fortunes doing them up. Worst case scenario, they've actually paid a deal sourcer to get the deal as well. And they're really in the hole financially because there is not enough demand for the amount of supply of that type of accommodation. Okay. That was me. 2019, 2020, 2021. All right. I made every mistake go and I scaled too much and I ended up blowing a fortune because I had the wrong stock. Where supply outstrips, or should I say, where demand outstrips supply, is the contractor B&B model. Okay. So 5, 6, 7 bed houses in and around hotspot locations, typically main city centers in and around there, where there is mid to long term demand for projects that are going on or for accommodation to serve the projects, infrastructure projects, energy projects, big housing projects, that sort of thing. And therefore, if you actually go on Airbnb and search 5+ bed houses, not sleeps 5 or more, actual bedrooms, you'll find that there's very limited stock. That is where the gold is. And that is exactly where I've been building my portfolio since 2022. And it has been an absolute game changer in terms of the amount of time and effort that I've had to put into the business, the amount of profitability that we've made, the amount of staff that I need to hire, the amount of chaos that we get, the amount of guests screaming, all that sort of stuff has just like calmed down. And we have a much nicer business model because at the end of the day, a tourist guest is emotional. All right. And they will cost you money. If they find a spider in the bath, if they, find a tooth, a toenail, or anything in the bathroom, they're going to report you to Airbnb. They're going to run their air cover claim. And you're ultimately not only going to lose the night, but you're also going to get the money taken back off you. And then you've still got to clean the place as well. So it's like a triple hit. All right. Now, this happens over and over and over again because ultimately the guests don't give a shit about you. They don't care about your profitability. All they want is their fancy stay. And if they can't get their fancy stay, because let's be honest, right? What Airbnb tourist guest wants is Ritz treatment, but they can't afford it. So that's why they book an Airbnb, because if they could afford it, they'd go book a nice hotel. All right. But they can't. So therefore they split costs and book Airbnbs, but then they still expect that treatment. And this is where the model just breaks down completely. And if you are tiny bit off, if your cleaners just miss a tiny little thing, then it can all fall down very, very quickly. You start getting bad reviews, so on and so forth. And then ultimately, the algorithms don't show your listing, your bookings start to drop even further. And the whole thing just spirals into chaos because booking platforms don't care about you either. Yes, you may have one or two listings. Yes, you may have hundreds of listings like I had at one point. Yes, you may have paid them hundreds of thousands, possibly millions in commission, but they don't care about you. All right. It's an algorithm. They, at the end of the day, want to put the properties on the platform at the top of the listings that will get booked. Now, if your property is not a popular property because Karen, didn't like the oat milk that you supplied in the fridge, and she left you a 1-star review, and therefore you've, dropped on the listing, then that's just the way it is. All right. They don't care. They don't care how loyal you've been to them, how much business you've given to them over the years. They do not care. Okay. It's such a fragile business model operating in the tourism game. I think also vetting is a big mistake that I made in the past is thinking that everyone that comes to Airbnb is going to be fine. Their vetting policies are terrible. Everyone that comes to booking.com are fine. Again, they're terrible. So you have to make sure that you have your own protocols in play, and it is in your terms and conditions with these OTAs that you can cancel if you are not comfortable with the guest that is potentially going to stay. So if you just don't like, for example, if we had someone booking in one of our Newcastle properties and they lived in Newcastle, that is a red flag. Why you want to book in the same city? Chances are you're going out this Friday and Saturday night. You want a place to stay, so you can drag a load of people back and have a party. Not going to happen. All right. And that's where the experience comes in, to be able to spot these things and have these kind of red flags raised with your team or yourself to be able to prevent the guest damage, prevent the parties, prevent the councils getting on your back, so on and so forth. Side note, this does not happen with contractors because they're not there to get pissed and have a good time. They're basically there to get their head down, get some rest, and then go back to site the next day. Now, I'm not saying that contractors don't misbehave, because of course they do. Sometimes the young lads might have had a few beers, so on and so forth, but certainly nowhere near as much as tourists getting drunk every Friday, Saturday night and coming back late, so on and so forth. I think also next point is, like, you can't please everyone, and that is just something you're going to have to accept. It is an emotional roller coaster, and if you try and please everybody, especially playing the tourism game, you will fail. You'll end up knocking your own confidence in as well. So for me, it's like you've got to find one avatar, and that's what I like about the contractor model. The avatar is typically the same, the guest type is typically the same, whereas with a tourist, you've got single people, you've got people coming for parties, you've got groups of lads, groups of girls, you've got families, you've got elderly couples, you've got all these different types of people that you have to try and cater for. Whereas on the contractor B&B side, you've just literally got a contractor traveling, wants to get his head down, have a nice home away from home experience, and then ultimately return home once his shift pattern's finished, whatever, once the project's finished. So I think also guests are careless, so you need to plan for that. Listen, we're all have a different attitude when we are in someone else's property. Just think of the last time you were in a hotel. Is there a chance that you left the towel on the bathroom floor? Is there a chance that you borrowed one of the sort of temporary toothbrushes and then just left it on the side? We all, I think, do things not really because we're disrespectful. It's just for some reason that's kind of how it is. And therefore this can be amplified in Airbnbs. Towels left on floors, crap left in sinks, stuff not tidied up, just messes everywhere. And I think you have to really expect that. And also, glasses getting smashed, keys getting lost, permits getting taken away in cars. You need to plan for these sort of things because, especially on the tourism side, this happens a lot. Next, one night stays. I remember when I first started and I had my Airbnb on one night stays, and then I realized, Jesus Christ, my cleaning bills are very expensive every month. So, and it was more the hassle of doing it, right? Got one checking in, one checking out, one checking in, one checking out, guest messages, Wi-Fi passwords, blah, blah, blah. It was just ultimate chaos. No one should have one night stays in this game. All right. Most people should be running with minimum 14 night stays. But again, that depends on your property type and on your guest type as to whether that will work financially for you. That is my preferred model. And that is ultimately how we get the mid to long term stays. But again, there's a lot more that goes on behind the scenes to be able to execute that in the traditional tourist model. It's a 2-3 night minimum. And typically 2 on the weekends, 3 through the week. Sometimes you can push it to 4 through the week, and that needs to be, I think, the bare minimum. But really want to be trying to build a model and a portfolio that actually has a much longer time frame in terms of the minimum night stay, because that will ultimately reduce your costs, increase your profitability, and massively reduce your stress. Cost control in this game is a real skill. And if you're not careful, it can spiral out of control. I know this firsthand. I used to have 105 staff across two offices, two physical offices. I used to have millions of different softwares, guest apps, this, that, and the other, pricing softwares. I used to have, multiple different staff, different layers of staff, phone costs, like you name it, right? We just had it. Then you go into the kind of wastage costs of storage centers for linen, bad storage, in terms of bad linen. We have linen go missing, getting miscounted. We had, bad accountancy practices, which potentially meant that we weren't charging some of the management clients the fees that they should have been charged for damages, maintenance, so on and so forth. And ultimately, you end up picking up that bill. If you can't control your costs in this business, you will never make profit. Your utility bills going from one rate onto another rate once your term had ended, mortgage interest rates, that sort of thing. All right, you need to be able to efficiently organize yourself so that you can control your costs. And the best way is to have a business model that doesn't need many costs. Okay, so now my business model is a hell of a lot simpler. 7 staff versus 105, no offices, everyone virtual. We have everything on a real cost control basis. We're not needing to have all these fancy apps because the model is so simple. We're not turning guests over every 2-3 nights. We're turning them over every 4, 5, 6 months, and it just works because the costs are down. I say it all the time, but I could probably add another 30 properties into my portfolio without having to add any more real costs, any more real staff, anything like that. I could not have said that in the days of tourism. Pretty much for every 10 properties, I needed to hire another VA because the demands was that great. So I think, and the final point I'll wrap up with is, like, better often makes you less money. All right. So what I mean by better is like these egotistical portfolios, and I was there. I wanted 1,000 units. That's all I was chasing. I think at one point we had 450 plus live, acquired over something like 670 in my total time frame between starting in 2018 to 2022, before I kind of curbed the model, or before the perfect storm hit and I started actually losing money, and it forced me to change the model. Volume is not the greatest player in this game. Quality of stock that makes a very healthy profit margin, and then that can not only protect you from the economic factors that could come into play in this game, but it can also give you a lot of flexibility on down seasons, low occupancy seasons, if there's any big maintenance issues, if there's any massive mortgage interest rate changes, that sort of thing. And that for me is a model that you can scale versus the old model with thin margins, lots of stock, lots of staff, and it was just a bit out of control. And that was always living on a knife edge. And as I found out, once certain things changed, occupancy rates dropped, bills went up, then quite quickly that business became very unprofitable, and nearly sank me. So fortunately here, and we managed to turn it around, but it was definitely the contractor focused element that has turned that business around, and is the only thing that I will focus on going forward because of the profitability plus the less stress, to actually operate that model versus the old model. So if any of this resonates, and obviously if you want to go deeper into the ContractorBnB model, click the link in the description, and you can get access to my community plus weekly training calls with myself for as little as £1 is the current offer. And it is a great place to start learning more about how you can either flip your portfolio or even just start your portfolio in the right way to make sure that you make profit each and every month of your journey.